as it talks about in the Old Testament, the still small voice. He wasn't in the earthquake. He wasn't in the fire. He wasn't in the whirlwind. But there was, basically it says there was remaining the still small voice. And after I finished last week's service, which was part 9 of the parable of the sower, I heard that sweet, small, very quiet voice, like a whisper, saying that was it. That series is over. And it's interesting, and you're thinking to yourself, well, gosh, God, why don't you just talk louder so we know your voice? And the problem with understanding God's voice is that it has to do with the inner peace you walk in. And if you have inner turmoil, you're not going to hear his voice. And that's kind of why he's saying he's not in the whirlwind. Because even if God showed up in a big dramatic way, you would still need to, within yourself, discern whether that was him or not. So either way, it comes down to a inner witness to know his voice, no matter how big or small that voice seems to be. And what dictates your following the inner witness, number one, is if you follow your conscience. Because what happens is when when you're entering a situation and your conscience is saying don't do it, because remember, when you're born again, you're perfectly righteous. You have a new nature. So when the conscience says no, but you override it and do it, that conscience saying no is kind of like this ugh feeling. It's kind of like this check. It's kind of like this, something kind of goes wrong on the inside of you because you're about to make a decision that you shouldn't make. You're about to do something you shouldn't do. And what happens is if you override that, you then from that point forward are living in that ugh, that check, that stop, that don't. There was that uneasy feeling on the inside of you. That was your conscience. But when you did the thing anyway, you now step into that uneasy feeling and now you live there. So now God, even if he wanted to try and tell you something, he really can't, because if he speaks it to you, that uneasy feeling that was your conscience, that you should have said, okay, I'm not going to do that, and then you would have stepped away from the uneasy feeling. But because you overrode your conscience, you stepped into that uneasy feeling, and that now becomes a chaos living on the inside of you. So that still small voice of God that would say, do this or do that, you can't hear it because you're now living in the confusion that you would have avoided had you obeyed your conscience.